This is Mrs. Sims starting with our library time today. I have a book to share with you. It's a little bit longer than some of those that we've been looking at, and I would like you to really listen well as I read the story. There are going to be some things again in this that I'm going to need you to respond to, either with pencil and paper, or if you're in kindergarten, perhaps in answering what you can of these questions. Answering these questions with an adult who's sitting with you. The book for today is a fiction book, and it's local fiction. And this one was published for an author in the state of Alabama. And it kind of is based in another setting of another time and another place. The book is called McClikker. And it's by Alan Johnson. And you're going to need to follow along carefully because you're going to see some parallels in this book to the story of David and Goliath. All right, if you can follow along carefully. All right, young'uns, I know you want to know about my little brother Picker. You all come on over here by the fire and get comfortable, and I'll tell you the story. That's it. Pull down some cushions and sit on the floor if you want to. Well now, did you know Picker's real last name? It was Joe. To understand how it all came about, you got to know about the McClikker family. We were all growing up during the 1930s when times were hard. Daddy farmed about 100 acres of cotton on shares, which meant he was a sharecropper. A sharecropper is someone who didn't own the land that they were working on, and they had to give back part of the crop in rent. We lived in a little frame house with a tin roof, and we had a big oak shade tree out front that helped to keep the front porch cool in the summer. There was a red dirt farm road that ran near the house with a barbed wire fence alongside that was covered in honeysuckle. In the summer, it smelled just wonderful. We lived in the country near Evergreen, Alabama. You might have a question about that later at the end. Where did this story happen? There never was much money, but Daddy made enough to buy cornmeal and dried black-eyed peas, and we had a cow and chickens, and Mama grew sweet corn and greens. That would be things like kale, or you may have heard of turnip greens, or even mustard greens, or collard greens, and such. So there was usually enough to eat. Daddy raised a hog now and then, so sometimes we had ham or bacon to eat. Sometimes there was a bone for our dog whose name was Bone, which was short for bone lazy, or being completely lazy. Mom would say, "Johnny, give that dog to Bone," and we always thought it was funny. There were 5 of us kids, 3 boys and 2 girls. There was me, Johnny McClikker Jr., Rufus, Sally, Amy Lou, and Joe the littlest. I was 10, Rufus 7, Sally 6, Amy Lou 4, and Joe was 2.5. I helped Daddy in the fields after school, and Rufus and Sally did chores, but Amy Lou and Joe were so young they mostly played around the yard. Okay, I'm going to slip this book cover off to make this a little bit easier. One evening in early summer, we'd finished supper and were all sitting on the front porch enjoying the cool and smelling the honeysuckle. Daddy was in the swing with his banjo, puffing on his pipe and strumming a chord or two. Mama was in the rocker with Amy Lou in her lap, and the rest of us were playing, when Bone slunk up on the porch. He had gotten into a patch of burrs. Burrs are stickers, pokey things. If you've walked out in the yard and these pokey things have stuck into your feet or your fingers, well, this dog had gotten into those and was stuck up with them something awful, from his whiskers to his tail. We all started to laugh, and Bone sat down looking mighty sad. When we stopped, Joe, who just could walk, toddled over to Bone and sat down, kerplop, and said, "Poor Bone, I gonna fix him." We were all watching. When he reached his hands to Bone, and then, it's hard to say what happened, but his hands seemed to move like a blur. Then there was some dog hair drifting around in the air and the neatest pile of burrs you ever saw. Bone was clean as a whistle, wagging his tail and practically grinning. Joe said, "Me fix 'em." I'm reading to you from a little different location in the house today. We've got several Zoom meetings and recordings and things going on right now in the other part of the house. "What in the world?" Daddy said. "Alice, did you see that?" "I think I did," said Mama, "but I don't believe it. Did baby Joe just pick about 100 burrs off Bone in about 3 seconds?" "I think he did, Alice. Fast. That boy's a pickin' fool. I've never seen the like." Us kids were impressed too, 'cause Daddy didn't get excited too often. But you know how kids are. By the next day, we'd forgotten about it. Mama hadn't forgotten, though. I guess it was 3 or 4 months after this that Mama was out in the garden picking some peas. She got to remembering Joe with the burrs and decided to give him a basket and try him out on peas. He'd been watching her do it, so I guess he knew what to do, 'cause by the time Mama had walked 20 feet to the porch for another basket and walked back to the pea patch, Joe had picked the whole row clean. Course, he couldn't reach the tops of the pea vines, but he sure got every one he could reach. Then Mama told him, Then Mama took him up on the porch and showed him how to shell peas. Joe was a quick study. Inside of a minute, there were about 3 quarts of peas shelled out pretty as you please, with the pods all lined up in a neat, nice pile. Mama said that boy is a natural-born picker. Rufus, who had come in from doing his chores, had been watching. He grinned at little Joe, mussed his hair, and said, "Picker McClikker." The name stuck, and Joe was Picker from then on. Anytime you're reading a book and you have a character who is given a nickname, you want to know why a character was given that nickname. So even if you're reading something else on your own, that should be something that you're thinking about later. Well, after a while, we all got to take Picker for granted. We knew he had a talent, but we didn't pay too much attention. If Mama had stuff to be picked out in the garden, Picker would do it before you could blink, but mostly Picker was a slow, dreamy little boy. He liked to be outside. Sometimes he'd walk around the field out back to Leafy Creek and lie on his stomach looking down in the creek, looking for crawfish. He could grab one out of the water and never get pinched. Sometimes I'd see him out in the yard, lying on his back, with his head on bone, watching the clouds. I knew what he was doing because Daddy had showed us how to see animals in the clouds. Picker was a happy little guy who could sometimes just laugh over a funny thought, but he never talked much. If he could get by with one word, he'd never use two. It wasn't till Picker was almost 4 years old that we really found out what he could do. Maybe some of you are like that. You're not students who really like to talk a lot. Or maybe you don't talk a lot at school, but you talk a lot with friends. It was during the cotton harvest. Daddy and us older kids had come out of the fields to get some lunch. We had about half the crop in, and Daddy was worried. The sky was really black over in the west. It looked like a bad storm was coming. Daddy said we should just grab a bite and get back in the field to try to save the rest of the crop. We knew we'd never do it, though. Picker was tugging at Daddy's overalls. "Picker, help!" Dad looked down. "What, son?" "Oh, thank you, son. I know how good you can pick, but you're too young to work in the fields." "No, Daddy. Picker, help." "Okay, son. Everybody can help. You come too. Alice, Johnny, run to the barn and get the rest of the bags. Throw them in the wagon and hitch up Glory. Bring the wagon out and meet us in the south field." This was what the family was looking at. You might recognize a picture like this if there was a tornado coming. By the time I got back to the field with the wagon, the lightning was popping and the thunder was whanging way too close for comfort. Glory was skittish, and I had my hands full, keeping her from running off. There seemed to be a little dust storm out there in the field, moving down the rows of cotton. When I got closer, I saw that the dust storm was Picker, all arms a blur. About every 5 seconds, he'd drop a full bag of cotton. So here you see him. They're starting here. You see the horse rearing up, and you see a blur. It looks like a cloud moving toward these cotton crops as Picker is picking cotton at a very fast rate, much like he had done when he was picking the burrs off the dog earlier. This is an interesting ability. Sally and Amy Lou were following him with empty bags. They'd hold one out to Picker, but you couldn't see him grab it. It would just sort of disappear. The girls had only a few bags left, but Rufus ran over and grabbed a double armload of bags out of the wagon. When he saw that Picker was doing a row every minute, Daddy quit picking and jumped in the wagon with me. We came along behind Picker, loading up the wagon with the full bags he'd left between the rows. When he got to the end of the field, I saw Mr. Crocker, who owned the land Daddy farmed, standing by the fence watching. His jaw had fallen open, and he was shaking his head like he couldn't believe his eyes. Well, it took Picker about 15 minutes to clean the rest of that field. Our mule Glory was all lathered up from running the wagon to the barn and back, and I had a sore rear end from bouncing on the wagon seat, but we got the crop in. Here's the property owner watching as McClikker moved through the field. We got Glory in the barn and ran for the porch. Just then the storm hit. Sheets of rain and hail, big as hickory nuts. "Woo!" Daddy hollered. He swung Picker up on his shoulders, and we all started hollering and dancing around like a bunch of crazy folks. The rain blew in on the porch, and we all got wet, but we were hot and sweaty, and it felt wonderful. A few days later, Will Crocker told Amos Burdash about Picker's amazing performance in the cotton field. Amos was the editor of the town newspaper. The Current was the name of it. And he didn't waste a lot of time. He drove his old Ford out to our place to talk to Daddy about an idea that he had. Here are the kids dancing around in the rain. "John," he said, "can this boy of yours pick grapes?" "Picker can pick anything," Daddy said. "Why do you want to know, Amos?" "Mr. Burdash," said John, "I've got an idea. You probably never heard about it, but there's a big grape picking contest in France next year. You probably never heard about it, but there is a big grape picking contest in France next month." "France!" Daddy hollered. "Amos, you must be—" "Listen, John, there's a prize, cash money, $5,000. I think this boy of yours could win it." Daddy sat down in the swing, looking like he'd been hit between the eyes with a 2x4. "Lord, Amos, that's a lot of money. You must be fooling me. I could never get Picker over to France. I can barely keep shoes on these young'uns, much less buy a ticket to France." "Not one ticket, John. 2. One for Picker and one for Alice. But the newspaper will pay for the trip. Here is something else. The champion grape picker in France is a 300-pound gypsy called Big Louis Gerard. Look here, I got a picture of him. Think of what a story it would be if Big Louie got beat by a 4-year-old from Evergreen, Alabama. It could put Evergreen on the map. If you put a place on the map, it means that that place becomes famous." "Lord," said Daddy, who seemed to be pared down to one word. Then Mama chimed in. "France? John, just think of it. I've never been further than Montgomery." "Oh, John, can we go?" I guess it had finally sunk in on Daddy, 'cause he leaned back in the swing with a twinkle in his eye and grinned at Mama fondly. "Alice, I'm going to miss you bad. But there ain't no way on God's earth I'd let you miss out on going to France." Good thing there was a strong chain on the swing, 'cause Mama jumped in his lap and gave him such a kiss that us kids got embarrassed. Here's where they first found out about the situation. And here's where the kids were turning their faces. A week after this, we were down at the station waving goodbye to Mom and Picker as the train pulled out. Okay, so in this time period, we're looking at trains. We're not looking at a lot of people having automobiles. After that, we read about them in the newspaper, but we didn't get the whole story till Mama got back and told us what really happened. Mama said it was embarrassing when they got to Bordeaux, France, and met Big Louie. Instead of shaking hands with Picker, Big Louie fell on the ground holding his sides, laughing till tears poured down his face, stopping only long enough to point at Picker in amazement, only to start laughing all over again. It made Picker mad, which is hard to do. Picker said to Mama, "Mr. Big Louie, not gonna laugh so hard tomorrow," which was the longest sentence anybody had heard out of Picker. This story seems a little bit like the story of David and Goliath, and how Goliath responded to the idea that he would be fighting David. Well, the next day they were out in the vineyard early. Each picker in the contest had his own row of grapes in a big square field. All the rows were the same length. Whoever got to the end first was going to be the champion. Big Louie had heard that Picker had never picked grapes before and started to laugh all over again. Then he told the judges to take Picker over in another field and let him practice, so he wouldn't be so embarrassed in the contest. Picker stood there with his arms folded over his chest and said, "No, thank you, Mr. Judge. Picker don't need practice." True. Very true, as it turned out. The judge fired a gun to start the contest, and Big Louie was just finishing off his fourth vine when another gun went off at the end of the field where Picker had finished. Big Louie looked stunned. "Mon Dieu," he said, "c'est impossible," which means something like, "Lord have mercy, that's impossible." Once more we see the blur in the drawing showing how quickly Picker's hands are moving before his competition can even really get started. It was quite a shock for Big Louie, but he turned out to have a heart as big as the rest of him, because when Picker got the prize, Big Louie gave a very warm speech. He said it was an honor to be beaten by Monsieur Picker, the greatest piqueur that the world would ever know. Piqueur was as close as the French could come to picker. It sounded something like piquer. Picker loved France, but he said he didn't like to be called no piqueur. Anyway, there was a victory parade, and Big Louie carried Picker all around Bordeaux on his shoulder while folks cheered and threw flowers. 2 weeks later, the world's champion grape picker came home to Evergreen, Alabama. It did put Evergreen on the map, too. All the big newspapers picked up the story of the 4-year-old champion grape picker. Picker was famous, but he didn't seem to care. He just went right back to being a normal little boy, only more dreamy and peaceful than most. Daddy went to put the prize money in the bank for Picker to have for college, but Picker said he wanted us to own our own piece of land and our little house, so Daddy used the money for that. But he put the house and land in Picker's name. There was enough left over for Daddy to buy a tractor, so he could farm a little easier, and our hard-working mule, Glory, could retire. Then Picker went downtown with Mama and bought us all something. Mama got some pretty new dresses, and we all got new clothes and shoes, but we each got something special too. Amy Lou got a beautiful doll. Sally, who was a tomboy, got a baseball glove and a ball. And me and Rufus got Red Ryder BB guns. Boy, was that exciting. Then Daddy asked Picker what he wanted. Picker want a pretty banjo like Daddy play, he said. Why, sure, said Daddy. No reason why a champion picker can't pick a banjo. Well, you might guess what happened when Picker got a hold of that banjo, but that's another story, one I aim to tell you next time. Right now, let's all get us a glass of cold milk and a cookie before bed. If you all come back tomorrow, I promise to tell you about Picker and his banjo, and how his banjo made things a whole lot better for all us McClickers. Night, young'uns. Sleep tight. Alrighty, I'm going to follow up right now with some questions, discussion questions. Okay, there are going to be 10 of them, so from time to time you'll need to make sure that you have something to write with and a paper. Remember that you can stop this at any point, just as you're thinking through your answer. All right. Number 1, where did Picker's family live? The book mentioned the state of Alabama, which is up close to Georgia, just west of Georgia. But Alabama, you may have heard. Do you remember the name of the town? Number 1, can you write down the name of the town in Alabama? Again, if you're a kindergartner and you can think of the name, you don't have to write it down. Okay, number 2. What were some of the foods that the family ate? This was what we would have thought of as a poorer family. What were some of the foods that they ate? Some of you are really going to like these vegetables. I don't know if you would like them every day, but there was a list of vegetables that the family ate. And then there were 2 meats that were mentioned as well. See how many of those that you can write down. How many vegetables and meats did the family eat? Next, how did Joe McClikker earn the nickname Picker? How did Joe McClikker earn the nickname Picker? Picker McClikker. Because the family's dog was lazy to the bone, the dog's nickname was what? Because the family's dog was lazy to the bone, his nickname was what? Write down that word. Next, what did Picker do to help save the family's cotton crop? What did Picker do to help save the family's cotton crop? And you can just respond with a sentence or 2 if you want to there. The next question is, why did Picker go to France? Why would a little boy his age end up going to another country? Why did Picker go to France? Next, what did Picker do with his $5,000 cash prize? I want you to list as many of those things as you remember from the story. What did he do with the $5,000 cash prize that he won in the contest? Next, do you agree with what he bought with the money? Do you agree with the choices that Picker made in how he spent that $5,000? Remember, he bought a tractor, that was one of them, for his dad, so that the mule that had been helping them with keeping the farm going could be retired, and so that he could cover more ground more quickly. It would be easier on the dad. That was one of the items, buying the tractor. But there were other things that he bought, both for siblings, for his mom, those kind of things. Do you agree with what he bought? Is there something else that you would have bought with the money if you had been alive during this time period? The next question is, why do you agree with what he bought, or why not? How else do you think he could have spent the $5,000? Okay, this is the last question. How was the story of Picker versus Big Louie like David and Goliath? If you could list as many ways as you can think of as to why this story was like the story of David and Goliath. Picker versus Big Louie, how was that story like David versus Goliath? Okay, for this, those of you who have been working with Venn diagrams, whether you are a first grader, second grader, all the way up to sixth grade, if you were to draw me a Venn diagram comparing and contrasting the story of Picker versus Big Louie and the story of David and Goliath, what parallels do you see? In what ways are things alike? In what ways are things different? And you'll remember that when you draw a Venn diagram, you make two big circles, and the circles overlap in the middle. I know that you're going to remember how to do that because you've been doing that quite a bit this year. So, in what ways is this story of Picker versus the champion in the country of France like the story of David and Goliath? And then in what ways is that story different than that story? All right, Mrs. Sims signing off here. I hope you're enjoying these videos and some of these question and answer times and activities. Have a good day, and I'll see you again.